Welcome everyone. We are about to start the webinar on managing records in Office 365, what works and what's missing. Jim, go ahead and let's start advancing the slides. Okay, so I'm David Kruglov and I'm a managing director with ShareSquared, and Jim Duncan is our chief architect. He's a Microsoft certified master. He's going to do the technical demos. I'm going to be presenting a fair amount today. The materials, if you download them, we will be providing a download links for the recording and the presentation. And you'll see that throughout the presentation, there are links to a lot of the things we're talking about. So we're going to cover a lot of material. We encourage you to download the presentation in PDF form and click through the links that you're concerned about, things that interest you. The agenda today will be a fair amount of talk track. If you've been on our other webinars, we had a prior records management related webinar on building out a retention schedule, taxonomy, and an effective RIM program with Bruce Miller. And so we're picking up this one kind of from where we left off. We're talking about what you can and can't do in Office 365, why you might consider Office 365 as a records repository. We're going to share with you the Gartner information that we've collected. Most of it's pretty current. Some of it's a little aged. We don't have the latest, greatest quadrants. We'll talk briefly about how Office 365 scores up against the DoD requirements. And that's a sort of work in progress. Jim and I, yesterday started working on a spreadsheet where we're mapping the requirements to Office 365. We're going to continue that effort, get more granular, and then we're going to add in some third-party support information for third-party products that are add-ins to Office 365. Jim is then going to take you on a tour of the Office 365 Security and Compliance Center, and then the Microsoft 365 Compliance Center, and he'll explain how those overlap and what we learned about that. Now, I want to say it says that the latter one is still in preview, and that's still the case. And from the time about a week and a half ago when we started putting together the demos we were going to do for you today and talking about the agenda and the script, we went back and did a kind of a dry run on Monday, and a lot of things have changed. So you may see some surprises today, things that we can't control. But again, that one piece is still in preview, so it's going to continue to change. And then we'll close out. We are going to do an extended QA this time. We've been ending the webinar on time. We like to be on time, but Jim requested that we hang around for a little bit and answer questions ad hoc if we can. So if people don't need to get to another meeting, feel free to stay with us. So real quick, who we are, and if you've been on our webinars, you've seen this slide before. We've been around since 2004. Our focus has always been SharePoint and now Office 365, and workloads such as intranets or collaboration portals, workflow, document capture, enterprise content, records management. We've had 13 SharePoint MVPs and 5 certified masters in our history. Jim is a certified master. As I mentioned earlier, there are 24 of them in the US outside of Microsoft itself, more or less. I think that's it. They're not making any new ones. Very, very difficult credential to get. So when it comes to SharePoint Office 365, he really is somebody who knows a lot. So bring your questions, send your questions. We've been answering those questions when we send out the PDF of the presentation. They're in the first few pages. We try to answer all the questions we get. We got some questions before the webinar. We'll add those in or maybe address some of them on the fly towards the end here. And then we've got some other differentiators, and we're in a bunch of Microsoft programs. One of the reasons why we put this slide here is not to sell to you, but we want to be clear on and transparent about where we come from. We are clearly a Microsoft stack provider. We are an Office 365 provider. We love the platform. And yet today we're going to talk objectively about where we think the platform does well and what's missing from a records management standpoint. So we always like to create an intention for our meetings and our webinars, and so that it sets up your listening of what we're going to say, right? So we're not trying to sell you anything. We are going to present some considerations beyond the records management feature set, and you probably joined to find out mostly about records management. We're going to talk about that too, but we're going to talk about some of the things, some of the capabilities of Office 365 that we think, you know, if you pull back a little and you look at an enterprise, if you're the CEO, the CTO, somebody who has to make bigger decisions, even if you're a records manager, but you're also concerned about privacy and you know, search and things like that, or you care about end user adoption, we're going to talk about from that perspective, broader than EDRMS, why does Office 365 occur for us as a good choice? And by the way, I use the term EDRMS, that's Electronic Document and Records Management System. We use that throughout here instead of the words records management because it's shorter. It encompasses kind of document management, records management. I would even say ECM kind of all fit in there. They're a little different, but we're going to talk about them today like they're kind of all in that acronym. We want to create community. That's why we're doing these webinars. We'd love to hear from you if you want to use us, if you want to use our products, you want to get an estimate, you want to do a project with us, we'd love to hear from you. But part of this is about creating a community. The SharePoint community has been one of the most amazing communities that I've ever been a part of. We've been a long-standing member with all the MVPs and things, and it's a very tight-knit group. We know each other from shows and things like that. People all over the world come together for the Microsoft shows, and we share ideas and we share code and things like that. So it's been a tremendous community, and we want this to be a community where you come to us or each other and share information ideas. We're not professing to know everything today. So you don't have to sit back and listen from, do you believe what I say or Jim says? Is it true or not true? We're not saying it is. We're just sharing some information. Some of the material is brand new, and I don't think anybody's mastered it. It's also very broad. It's hard to have mastered it. So we're just sharing what we know today. We're going to try to be, well, we will be authentic about what we think works and what's missing. So we're not just presenting the Microsoft point of view. We want to answer your questions either today or as a follow-up. And then we really want to entice you to come to the next webinar. And I say that because there's going to be a little twist in this webinar where you might go, wait a minute, I thought David or Jim was going to say something different than they said. And so one of the things that will get answered, will get addressed, is some of the deficiencies in the Office 365 records management feature set, you know, how you can address that using a partner product. And so we'll talk more about that later, but we really would like you to listen here for what Office 365 can and can't do, and then come to the next webinar to learn how you shore up those deficiencies. Okay, we're going to do a poll, and we're going to do 3 of these. They're we think they're fun. We're going to start off with which system are you, ERMS system are you using? We'd love you all to play. You don't have to. We're not doing much with this information, so don't feel like if you do or don't, there's any concern or penalty. The groupings of these products is not for any particular reason other than that GoToWebinar only allows 5 picks. So we had to group things like Laserfish and Highland together. So I'm going ahead and launch the poll. And if everybody would please vote. Okay, getting ready to close it. 5, 4, 3, 2. Still some coming in. 2, 1. Okay, we're going to close it, and then I'll show the results. So you can see for yourself, we've got a lot of open text, or maybe Documentum. You know, they were acquired by open text or FileNet. We don't know for sure. We see this a lot. We do a lot of work with state and local government, so that's a, you know, these have been very popular products. They've sort of started around the 90s and have had a good base. And they have a fairly singular focus on ECM and records management, whereas of course Microsoft is a much broader platform. And so, it's kind of interesting. So now we're seeing a lot of SharePoint and Office 365. I would say that was not probably the case in the past, and I'd love to have been able to ask other or none as separate items, but again, we had that limitation with the voting. So, okay, this is where we're at right now. It's good to know what the audience is interested in or working with. All right, let's go back to the presentation. So again, I'm going to present why you might consider using Office 365. So one of the reasons is ubiquity. Most organizations already have the licensing. So unlike if you go with a different product where you have to go out and acquire licensing, mostly you have the licensing. There are different licenses within the Office 365, scheme or SKUs, but a couple of stats that I pulled for this were over 400,000 organizations and 70+% of the Fortune 500. That number grows probably weekly, daily maybe. I know that the second bullet point there, 200 million active Office 365 users and 44 million Teams users, that 44 million Teams users shot up since the crisis, the current coronavirus crisis, by 13 million in whatever the period was, like a month or something. So the charts below kind of tell the story, but if you've got this many people using the product, you've got skills on staff to use it. You've got it installed already. You have the licensing already. Some people understand or have been trained on it. So this is a good reason to maybe leverage this as the underlying platform. Productivity. Microsoft gives us a lot of productivity applications. We did a webinar on April 1st on remote project delivery, and we talked about a few of these, but Microsoft To Do is for personal task management. These are all links. So when you get the presentation, you go into them. I'm not going to have Jim do that for all of these, but Planner is for a group collaboration and productivity. So you can, we use, one of the applications we have is an RFP plan, and we use it to manage the vetting and development, QA and development of RFPs from when we're first received them to when we do QA. We're waiting for QA review. We then submit our proposal. We get a notice of, an award notice, or we don't, and all the way through a notice to proceed. So Planner is very simple. It took us about an hour to throw that application together. Bookings is for people to book meetings with you. Jim has in his signature line, book a meeting with me, and you have some pretty fine controls about the hours people can book and things like that. The built-in workflows in SharePoint, and then Power Automate, which is the newer workflow application that comes with Office 365. I mentioned third-party solutions. This probably shouldn't be here really, because we're really talking about Office 365 out of the box, but we do from time to time pull in a product called PlumSale we started using because they have a public-facing electronic form, which is very interesting for government agencies or anyone who's trying to collect information from, the anonymous web user versus, authenticated user in Office 365. So. Reliability and security. So Office 365 uptime, you see a little verbiage at the bottom there. The 3-year average has been 99.979%, which equates to a downtime of 1 hour, 50 minutes, and 27 seconds. That is unbelievable. And when sometimes we talk to organizations who are concerned about reliability, and I don't think that most of them could say that they have that uptime statistic. That is very, very, very hard to do and very expensive to have the kind of redundancy and things that ultimately result in that kind of uptime. And then the other thing is the intelligent security graph, and you can just kind of read some of the metrics there, like 470 billion emails analyzed per month. So there's a lot of artificial intelligence going on in the background in the platform. And again, we see this as a differentiator. I don't know OpenText. I don't know, FileNet. I have seen them. We have migrated customers off of those applications and into Office 365. So we know a little bit about how they store metadata and documents, but we've never been end users. And maybe they have all this stuff now, but because Microsoft is handling your email and it's handling your collaboration portals and maybe your workflow, they have a tremendous amount of data, and they're doing a great job doing threat protection and things like that for you. and it's pretty automated. So Jim, I don't know if that link will work. What that protection alerts is was an alert. I think, I don't know if it was one we got this morning or not, but let's see if it opens. You're gonna have to sign in. Well, so anytime there's an unusual amount of activity where someone's downloading a bunch of files, or someone signs in from a country outside the United States, things like that. Yes, Jim's got it on the screen there. So we get these alerts, and it's amazing to know that Microsoft's got our back on this, and we don't have to do anything. It's all kind of set up. You can tweak, the number of alerts and what it's looking at, but just out of the box, it's gonna look for some of the things that might be major concerns. Okay, we're going to talk about some of the compliance features. There are just a ton of certifications, and actually, Jim, if you'll click on the Trust Center, let's see if that link comes up. So we'd encourage you to take a look at this. These won't all apply to you. One of the things Jim asked me when we were warming up before the webinar today is, how do you deal with the overwhelm? How do you deal with somebody who's sitting in the audience that's looking at all this stuff and going, how are we ever going to do all of this? Well, you don't do all of it. It doesn't all apply to you, first of all. And secondly, you do it over time. And if you need help, you get an organization like ShareSquared to help you. We've done a lot of this stuff already. Embedded in some of these links, you can go into that SOX one, Jim. It actually tells you, there's instructions on how you configure Office 365 for that particular compliance. So, the information's there. Yeah, it's a lot, and you're not going to deal with all of it. But if you're somebody in your organization who cares about these certifications, one of the ones that that comes up a lot in law enforcement is the CJIS one, the Criminal Justice Information Systems. That's a big deal. Microsoft has the CJIS compliance, so those kinds of things are really important. There's information about the government cloud and some DoD components and things like that too you can explore. Jim? Okay, next topic, integration. Microsoft's done a great job, obviously integrating with the Office suite, but most of the customers we talk to, most of the organizations we talk to are on Exchange, most of them on Exchange Online, and the integration obviously between anything made by Microsoft is gonna be very good. We're leveraging Active Directory, in Office 365, there's single sign-on. It's very, very easy to set up. And then there are some specific APIs if you want to build on top of the management components or the Microsoft Graph, which is going to be a big thing. It's collecting a lot of information about who I'm connected to, who I'm collaborating with, what documents I'm working on. There's all kinds of connectivity back there that you can start to do analysis with yourself if you want to use the APIs. Business Connectivity Services is a framework or part of the platform that allows us to connect to a web service that's served up by an external application, a database. So maybe you have a homegrown database with some data that you want to integrate with Office 365, an old school DLL. I mean, it's a framework. I say it's declarative because you don't really write code. It's configurable essentially. And once you've configured your and there's some plumbing to this, I'm not saying you do this in 5 minutes, to be clear, but once you do the requisite plumbing and you configure a BCS connection, you can pull in external data and you can really use it permission trimmed anywhere in an Office 365 tenant. So one of the very standard use cases that we see in records management is where maybe some of the tagging or some pick lists are coming from an external system, like your HR system. Maybe the employee IDs and names are coming from there. And what we don't want people doing is keying in that information, because if they make a mistake and they put in the metadata incorrectly, then we can't group things appropriately as case records, or we can't find them as we're looking at one system and trying to match up with Office 365 or documents that are there. We can't effectively match them up. So to the degree we can, we want to control the inputs with pick lists. And one of the very typical things that we do for records management is to do an integration with BCS to pull in those pick lists, maybe a list of asset IDs or asset names or types of assets, permits, like I said, employee IDs, things like that. And then Power Automate connectors. Jim, if you want to just click on that link real quick, there's kind of this growing list of connectors that are pre-built for Power Automate. So, you might be scratching your head right now going, I thought this was about records management, but I can tell you we do a lot of RFPs, requests for proposal responses for state and local government. And I can say that in almost all of them, there are elements of integration and workflow. So this is, and they are records management projects. We want a records management solution, and we also want it to integrate with our other systems, and we want it to have workflows. That's a very common thing. So while we may think of records management as just about, retention and disposition, in reality, what we see is that it's much more than that. And we have to respond to these requests for proposals with essentially the feature set that's required. And Office 365 does a really good job. It gives us a lot of different options for doing, connecting to other systems and things. So as Jim is scrolling down this list, you won't use all of these. So, to Jim's question earlier, don't be overwhelmed, but these connectors are there if you need them. And if there's a particular system you're using, there's already a connector. It becomes very easy to do a workflow that integrates with that system. Okay, analytics. You're going to see in a little bit, we're going to show the Gartner quadrants. You're going to see that Microsoft is running away with this particular category. Power BI is the platform for that. And again, that you don't have to open the link, Jim, but that'll take you to information about it. You probably have already heard of it. The other two things on the screen are the usage analytics, which I love. This is, how are people working with the platform? Is it well adopted? What are they doing? And I think, again, I'm not trying to beat up on other what we would call legacy records management systems, the ones that were built in the 90s, but they just didn't have this level of analytics. And because Microsoft is, doing so many things, it's hosting Exchange, and it's got the collaboration portals, and it's got all the things I've been talking about. They're keeping the data behind the scenes, so they're in an advantage when it comes to analytics anyway, because they have the data. But they do a tremendous job with Power BI, being able to surface that data, and then things like the usage analytics, that's out of the box. We didn't, that pretty little chart, we didn't do anything for that. That I just clicked on it and I took a snapshot of it. And the one that is my analytics, that's kind of how I spend my day. And it's interesting. It's insightful. It shows that I take no days off. That's what the little zero is right there under well-being. You can't really see it, but anyway, it is. It's just the point is there's a lot of information back there that we can leverage. Modern architecture and innovation. So Office 365 was officially launched in 2013. I've mentioned a couple times some of the systems we're sort of comparing it to. And look, I don't want to draw any fire for that. If you love your system, keep it. We just want to make sure you're aware that there's this other thing out there that has a lot of capabilities. We're not trying to, say Office 365 is better than yours, but it is newer than most of those systems. It was built with the cloud first in mind. If you think about early 90s, we didn't have the internet. So if you were, and I was a developer in the early 90s, so when we were developing stuff, we were not considering, latency like that, or responsiveness, and all the things you have to think about when you do when you move to an internet application like that, that some of these vendors have struggled to catch up to, right? So mostly what you see is they don't really have a true cloud product. What they do is they host it in their private cloud. So it's a hosted, it's a little different. Interoperability versus a standalone legacy system. So that's important, and this will come up again. One of the things that what we see is when a customer says, well, listen, we do records management in this commercial system that we bought solely for records management. And we also use Office 365 because it's so wildly popular for collaboration. And we might even have, in fact, most customers would say, we also have a lot of files on the file share. So we have multiple content repositories. And what ends up happening is in the Microsoft world, because they have email and they have the collaboration portals and they have so many different pieces, a lot of those pieces interoperate. I mentioned earlier the integration with the Office suite of products, things like that. what happens with those organizations that just have a siloed records management system is that's their official records, and not all the official records get there. So when we work with government customers, they will tell us, the records managers tell us, that just about everything's a record. Just about everything is subject to a public records request, could be the subject of a litigation, some e-discovery, and they need to manage it. They want to know what it is, what kind of document. This is a contract, is distinct from an employee record or something else. They want to be able to quickly find it, and they want to be able to produce it if they have to. So having a siloed system that has just some of the records of an organization isn't effective for some organizations. So that's what we're talking about there. If we could, and I'm not saying we can just yet, if we could consolidate on Office 365, and that was the place where records were, then it would be a lot easier if we could manage them in one place, all right? And to add to the capabilities, we have a very robust third-party market that continues to evolve. There are vendors like next webinar we're doing with Gimel. Gimel is a records management add-on for Office 365 that fills in some of the blanks you're going to see today. And you know, they've been around for years, but they continue to innovate. They're not going anywhere. They're not a company that was acquired by, you know, say Documentum 10 years ago. Well, all the people are gone now. And then Documentum was acquired by OpenText. It doesn't look that way. What it looks like is they're a very viable, doing well, and continuing to innovate company that adds on top of Office 365 and SharePoint. Lastly, Microsoft's made a big investment in, you know, things like machine learning, AI, natural language processing, streaming video, things like that. Jim, we're kind of running, I'm running long. So take a look at Project Cortex. If you're interested, download this, or you can search it. It's fascinating. What we're particularly interested in there is the auto classification capability. So for records management to work, I think in any system, you have to correctly identify what type of record you're dealing with. You have to know that this is an invoice as distinct from, say, an employee record. Invoice, maybe you keep for 3 years after the fiscal year from which the invoice was created. Employee record might be 7 years after the termination of the employee, and a contract might be 10 years after the end date of the contract. So very, very different retention periods, but to first know which retention to apply, you have to know what is the document. So Cortex is edging in that direction. There are other technologies. We're hoping that Cortex is sort of the answer for that, because then we don't have to add a third-party product, and we think Microsoft will do a very good job with that. Next, Jim. Okay, a lot of words on this slide. So in place, records management and cost is what we're talking about. And some of this I talked about earlier, but we're saying that collaboration portals and records management are two sides of the same coin. And what does that mean? Well, if I am trying to manage documents, their retention and disposition, and collaboration portals is where the content is being created and collaborated on, they're kind of the same thing, right? So the documents that are being created and collaborated on, going through some process, are records, and we want to apply the records management on top of that. So we're advocating for doing retention disposition in the same system, not that siloed approach I talked about earlier. And that allows us to have a common taxonomy. So we don't have one for Laserfish and then one for Office 365. We need to manage all content if we can, right? So we get a common taxonomy, we administrate them, whether from a records management or an IT professional standpoint. We reduce the content silos. Now, if we are already on Office 365, that's going to reduce the time to market for doing records management, at least in that environment. And that's going to lower the cost and training, like change management effort. There's great support from the Microsoft Partner Channel. We're a Microsoft partner. The ISVs like Gimel and others that are building products and continue to, you know, build modern products that work with the platform. You can go out and recruit people who know Office 365 and SharePoint. So that's a, you know, I'd say that's probably very different than the recruiting market for a FileNet. And Microsoft doesn't lock in your data. We've done a lot of ECM or records management migrations where the documents are in some kind of an envelope that's proprietary, and we have to go to the binary level to strip off the envelope. to get back to a document that no longer has the same name as it was put in there, no longer has the same extension. So we have to look at its binary signature to determine, is it a PDF or a Word document, or what was it originally, strip all that away, and then get it back to its native format. Microsoft stores documents in their native format, and they don't obfuscate. That word that's kind of a programming word. That just means they don't hide the identity or original type of the document. Okay, so this is the big picture, right? Connected cloud. We've got one platform for email, calendar, identity, social, sync and share documents, records, tasks and workflow, collaboration, video, analytics, and probably a bunch of other things. And just as an example, I'm not picking on open text. This is an old slide, so but it is true that even if you have one of those systems, you still have to have an email system. So it might be Exchange or maybe use Google. And then you're probably going to have something for your sync and share. Maybe that's Box or Dropbox. And Trello is kind of like Planner. Slack is like Teams. So to get to the same level, you're going to have to incorporate a whole bunch of different products. Jim, you're going to be lucky. You're going to have almost no time for demos. You got the hard part today. You lucked out. I'm talking so much. Okay, so now we're going to move into what do the analysts say? What does the market look like? This is an older slide. It's from 2018. It was the newest one. I believe it's from AIM. It's the newest stats I could find, but you can just see that this market continues to grow. ECM, we're using sort of synonymous with records management. There are some distinctions. I won't go into those today, but we're managing content, right? And Microsoft, I'm sure that pie chart there is wrong. I'm sure that Microsoft has got another big chunk of that. The consolidation from years ago was OpenText bought Documentum and so forth. And we're seeing a decline in some of the older systems. And I think in part, there's not a lot of investment in those areas. And then, it's coupled with the ubiquity and growth of Office 365 as a collaboration platform. So that's what that looks like. I'm going to go very quickly. You'll get these if you download the presentation. So I'm not going to read this or explain what content services is. This is probably the main one that we're focused on. We're talking about enterprise content and records management, and you can see that Microsoft is right out in front with OpenText and Highland and IBM. This is collaboration platforms, also one of the key ones. So Microsoft and Box out front, but Box is endeavoring to do some of the same things, but I think they're very far behind. And then enterprise information archiving, we care about archiving, especially records manager types. Want to know about that. So here again, Microsoft. Oh, you moved too fast on me, Jim. Microsoft's, not in front, but when you consider all of the other things in the platform, and that's the point of these slides, is for you to see that, yeah, Microsoft's not number one in any one of them, but if you want to be number one in all of them, there are 8 of these slides. You'll have to buy 8 different products, maybe. Go ahead, Jim. We talked about analytics and BI. Microsoft way out front now in that area. And this is about security, managing endpoints. And again, Microsoft, out in front with a few others. Also security, so another one where Microsoft is leading. We're going to give you, there's some links in the security slides that you can refer to for some of that information. Integration, we talked about that as well. So Microsoft somewhere in the mix there. All right. Okay, we promised to do a DoD analysis. Jim and me opened up the DoD spec, which is that link there from June of 2002. It's the 5015.2 spec. And we did, we converted all of the paragraphs, essentially the sections, to a spreadsheet. And then we consolidated. We took just the major headings and we consolidated down further. And we did a score. Now, this isn't scientific. And if you're a DoD expert, you probably disagree with what we did here, and that's okay. We're saying, knowing what we know about SharePoint and Office 365, some things don't exist, some things are very well supported, we think. And when we did that, we looked at it from the perspective of some of the DoD requirements we think are out of date, because if you originally came up with those specs in the 90s and then you update them in 2002, well, a whole lot's happened in the last 18 years, right? We also looked at that the DoD doesn't necessarily consider usability. So there are some exhaustive records management requirements that would probably be great for a records manager, but probably not great for an end user who's putting the content into the system. So we tried to measure, kind of weigh in on that a little bit. And then there's some modern requirements that are missing. So multi-factor authentication, just an example, but there's a whole bunch of them because again, the spec predates a lot of that technology. So we came up with a score for fun. You can certainly tell us what you think. Our plan is to go into the individual paragraphs and get a score for each one. So this is a little more scientific, and then add a column for third-party support. So I mentioned that Gimel is going to be our partner on the next webinar. They add a lot of these capabilities. They'll push some of these scores up to a 5 where they're not so high. So we plan to do that as well. Okay, we're going to do another quick poll. We're running pretty far behind, which we tend to do, and I'm going to see what we can do to catch up. I'm launching it now, and please vote quickly so we can keep moving. Okay, I'm going to give about 10, 9, 8, 5. All right, last 3 seconds, and we'll close the polls. Still a lot of changes, so I'm delaying. Well, it's still changing off, but good enough for now, not scientific. All right, here's the results. So no surprise that Exchange would be out front. That's the workload that most people move first to Office 365. Interesting that OneDrive is as high as it is. We're kind of happy to see that, but I know a lot of organizations have been concerned about that. Teams, I bet if we did that number 2 months ago, it probably was a lot lower. And I would love to talk to the people who are none of the above, and I'd just love to know what they're using. It'd be very interesting. And I'd like to know how today's webinar landed, because obviously we're not supporting, we're not talking from everyone's perspective or point of view. We're talking, more purely from an Office 365 provider's point of view. So, so I'm sure there's great technologies that are in use. We're not promoting today. Jim? All right, Jim, it's your turn. Move through these quickly. What I told Jim is if he can do a demo, do a demo if we have time, and if it's working, we spun up a test demo and put some content from Microsoft in it. Some of that was still kind of filling in. Some of this changed from last week to this week. So we're gonna do the best we can, and there might be some wrong turns or whatever, but the intent is just to teach you a little bit about what we've been learning as we're working with the platform. So go ahead, Jim.
Thanks, David. All right, so yeah, we're gonna have to breeze through some stuff here and maybe do some follow-up calls with some of you if you want to go deeper into anything that we're going to look at today. So we're going to start with labels. So classification with sensitivity and retention labels. We're not going to talk a lot about sensitivity labels today. I'm gonna kind of cut that one in the interest of time. The most important thing to know about labels is, regardless of whether it's a sensitivity label or a retention label, it has to have a unique name. I ran into that yesterday when I was trying to create a retention label called confidential, because there was already, or a sensitivity label called confidential because there was already a retention label called confidential. So not a huge deal, but sensitivity labels are really a way to apply, specify how sensitive the data inside a given document is. Is it highly confidential, related to a specific project? These are just samples that were put here in this demo environment. And then based on the sensitivity labels that are applied to documents, whether that's done automatically based on their content or manually by users, those labels can be used to make decisions about who gets to access the content, and digital or data loss prevention policies are where they're used. Again, another thing we won't have time to talk about today. So switching over to retention labels, this is where we define sort of at a high level what our retention categories are. This is one set of examples here in this environment. This is a demo tenant created by Microsoft. If we look at another example here, let me go to the correct place. If we look at our retention labels here, I've created a few here that are related to case management. So a lot of organizations have to manage collections of records that individually the documents might have their own classification, but overall the entire thing needs to be treated as a case and potentially managed in whole. So this particular screen shows an example of retention labels designed for event-based case management kind of retention. And then in addition to the labels here, we have policies that publish those labels out to the environment, to either Exchange and or SharePoint Online and or Office 365 groups and teams and or OneDrive. So an example here is we've got a label that we're calling OneDrive default. And in this, we're basically saying that users are free to use OneDrive, but if they leave documents in there for too long and don't make any changes to them, we're just going to automatically prune that content for them. If they don't do anything else with the document for 5 years, then it'll just disappear. So we've got that label there, and then we push that label out to the actual OneDrive sites with this policy. This policy, it simply makes this label available in OneDrive sites. It doesn't, this policy doesn't automatically apply it to the content. We have to do a different kind of policy to do that. So this one simply makes the label show up as an option for users to choose. This policy to auto apply that label is another thing that you have to create in order to have the labels automatically applied to content. In this case, it's content in OneDrive. So the result of this is that if I were to upload a file to my OneDrive and then never modify it for 5 years, not make any changes to it, eventually it will be deleted after 5 years. What's missing here, as far as I can tell, based on all my research so far, there's no real way to prevent the owner of the OneDrive from clearing that label that we automatically applied. So now this document will sit around forever if the user doesn't delete it. So I think that's kind of a big missing piece there, is the fact that, even if we automatically apply a label to content, unless we also lock it down as a record, users can just remove our label or change it to something else, which I see as a big drawback here. Now, there might be something out already or on the horizon that I don't know about that would prevent users from changing their labels, but I couldn't find it yet. So even mention of something for preview. So that's a big deficiency, I think. I'm not a records manager, but if I want to enforce a policy where documents that aren't, that are kind of forgotten about for 5 years get automatically deleted, I don't want people to be able to override that without some sort of process. But given that it's their OneDrive, they are technically the owner. They have full control of that library and all the documents that are in it. So I can't really stop them from editing those documents. So that's kind of a big one there. There's a lot here for retention labels. I can quickly walk through the wizard to create one of those. You've got the name. I'm not going to go all the way through this process. I just want to fill out a few different pieces of information here to just give you some idea of what it's like. So luckily, I've got all this information on my notepad over here, and it's easy for me to just copy paste, and I don't have to make it up on the fly. Because really, if I was doing this on the fly, I probably wouldn't know what to put here if I hadn't thought about it first. This tab, this step in this wizard this is relatively new. This is part of the file plan option that you get with, I believe it's an E5 or G5 license. This is where we actually start to apply a little more intelligence for a records manager from a file plan perspective to a label. Prior to the file plan being available, all you really had was the name of the label and the settings, and that's it. But now we can start to categorize and even provide citations of what, you know, is it SOX? Are we creating this label so that we can comply with Sarbanes-Oxley? Who's our authority for that? Is it a business, just our decision? Is it a legal authority, regulation that we're under? And then we get, you know, 2 levels of category and subcategory. Well, from here, we only get to choose a category. When we look at where this shows up later in the file plan, there's an option for subcategory. So a little bit of hierarchy there. You might need that, but only 2 levels so far. We can assign the label as a specific business function or department, and we can make up our own retention category code, if you will, for this. So I'm not going to go all the way through. I'm not going to fill all of those out. I'm just going to show that, for example, if we wanted to retain this content for 10 years from, and after that 10 years, we wanted to do a disposition review, we can select who is going to do that disposition review. As far as I can tell, it's individual people. You might be able to do groups in here someday. I think you can add multiple people here if you want, but not just a group. So if you need to change who's going to review disposition for a certain label, you have to come here to do it. You can't just adjust the membership of a group that you've defined that should be responsible for this. So another kind of missing piece that again, this could change next week. It could be that next week we have the option to choose groups in here, but for now we don't. And then we want to determine from what date are we calculating this 10 years. Now, so we see a lot of retention schedules and file plans that just say 10 years, but they don't say 10 years from what. Now, is it the date that the document was created? Is it the date that the document was modified? Is it the date that we finally understood what category it should be and applied the label to it? Those are our only kind of options here. Notice that there's nothing here about custom date columns that I've added to my content types over in SharePoint. Okay, that is one of the big missing pieces here. So if I want to base my retention period on anything other than when it was created, modified, or labeled, then I have to use event management, which we'll look at here in a minute. For now, I'm just going to choose an event type, and now all of a sudden I'm stuck. My event type that I want to use for closing a project is not here. But luckily I can take this little side quest and I can create a project complete. Oops. Now, and I can say that this is a type of event. When the project is officially closed, we can go in and create an event to make sure that that happened. So let me just copy that and paste that and finish. So now I've got my event type and I can select it here, and we'll add that and we'll hit next. And I think I did enough to get by. It might not be perfect, but at least now I have a label that I can apply to project documents. And next thing I need to do is actually publish that label. So creating the label in here doesn't really do anything other than define it. To actually make use of the label on any of my content, I have to publish it. So I'm going to quickly go into the Publish Labels wizard here. I'm going to choose that label that I just created. And we will choose Project Documents. We'll hit Add, and then we'll do that. And this just tells me that that's the settings on the label. I'm only going to choose a specific Office 365 group for this one. So let's choose a group. Let's just say that it's the IT team that's doing our projects. So we'll publish this label to their site, and their site only. So what that means is if we want to make use of this label in other Office 365 groups in the future, we have to come here and add that to this label policy and push it out again. One of the things that's missing here is a way to say all SharePoint sites or Office 365 groups that have this pattern in their address or have this word in their name or have been classified as a project portal or a certain type of site. It's really manually choosing which SharePoint sites and which groups and which OneDrive accounts that you want to publish the label to, unless you're just going to publish it everywhere, which is kind of rare as far as I've seen so far. So I hit next. I have to give my policy a name. So we will call it, we'll just call it project documents as the policy. And this policy is really, again, just publishing the label and making it available outside of, for use outside of the Security and Compliance Center. How are we doing on time, David?
The usual. We're running behind. It's okay.
Yeah.
How much
Okay,
more? Do you have about 5 minutes? Do you have, or what? Where are you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I could go on all day if you want, but I can cut it to 5 minutes.
Yeah, go ahead and finish the rest of the topics. To the audience who's still there, we are going to go a little long today and try to answer some questions on the fly if you're able to stick around. So feel free to do that. I do have a few. I want to get to the twist at the end, which is kind of the slide after the demos. I definitely want to cover that. So go ahead and keep going for a few more minutes.
Yeah. All right. So one thing to note, it'll take up to a day for your label to show up so that people can make use of it. In some cases, some things might take 7 days after you publish them before they show up in Exchange. So if you're creating labels for email or that are to be included for email, it might be 7 days before people can make use of them. So plan accordingly. But I'm going to go ahead and publish this label. And again, that one doesn't automatically apply to all of the documents in that site, in that Office 365 group that I published this label to. That just gives the members of that group the ability to attach that label to their content. If I want to automatically apply that label to their content, I also have to create an auto apply policy, like the example that we looked at earlier. So that's kind of labels at a really high level. If we switch over to the records management grouping of navigation nodes here, we'll see that the new file plan includes all of our retention labels. So if we look here, that one that I just made about project documents is here in this list. And this is how we can, start to add that extra level of information about the label itself. Like our code here. So here's our code for this one is case closure plus 3 years. But if we wanted to, we could even apply a department that's used for, category and subcategory, again defining which authority we're listening to make that decision, even if it's ourselves as the business. And if we need to attach it to a citation of some official kind of provision or regulation, we can do that as well. And that's kind of what brings it to the file plan. A good thing to know is that we can import our file plan from a CSV file. So we don't have to click around and manually create all of our labels. If we already have used Excel to collect that information, it might be as simple as exporting a table from Excel with the correct column names to a CSV file, and then we can import it here. So that makes it a little easier. However, when I attempted to do an import myself, there were some limits to that. So when we look at creating a label, we can make our label names quite long if we use the browser to do it. We can make our descriptions quite long. but the import process limits you to 64 characters per field, which probably not going to be enough unless you're, unless you're really, really good at abbreviating things. Let's see here. I think that's the best part about the file plan myself, is that we can import it from an Excel file. So that means I can take an import file that I've created that will meet the needs of many, many customers as a first deployment, and reuse that for many different customers, and then just grow it from there. I'd like to go deeper on the file plan, but we're getting short on time. I do need to show events. So again, we created a retention label and specified that it will calculate the time of retention from the event. So we'll just pretend that our project B has closed or completed, and we'll put in a description there someday, and we'll say that we want to choose an existing event type, and we'll choose project complete, and we'll hit add, we'll hit next, and then we can say that, if we wanted to, if we were using asset IDs, which is something is still relatively new, we could do keywords for exchange to sort of gather additional things. But really what we're saying is that on April 13th, that project came to a completion. So now any documents that are tagged with that label will have retention calculated from April 13th, 2020. So that means on April 13th, 2030, a disposition approval process will begin for all of those documents. Now, that is going to apply to all of them unless we tag everything with an asset ID. So asset ID is how you would assign sort of a project ID number to each project, and then that would have to be included with the metadata for those items to tie it to this specific project. So a little confusing. I still don't fully understand it myself. I can make it work. I don't know that I could 100% tell you why it works the way it works, just that I figured out how it works. Let me see, a quick tour. So a lot of this stuff that we've looked at so far today shows up in the new Microsoft 365 Compliance Center. So this is a different interface, if you will, for some of the same information designed maybe for a person that has a different role related to this content. But we've got our data classification labels here. We've got we've got e-discovery over here, which we don't have time to look at today. But the biggest thing that the Compliance Center has that we didn't see over in the Security and Compliance Center is our compliance score. So we get a nice little gauge here about how we're doing. There are some things that Microsoft does for us in terms of compliance, and then some things that are on us to do, like set up protection for our wireless access points. It's not all related to compliance from a records management standpoint. It's a little bit broader than that. I could stop there for now, David, so that we can get back to the slides and
Yeah,
let people know that have a hard stop.
Let's do that. You did a great job covering the material quickly. So let's go back to the slides, and then we'll wrap up for the people who have to go. We've got about a minute. I think there's a slide before this, though. Okay, so if you were watching what I was watching, what Jim did, and maybe even some of the things I said, it was a little confusing. And we're working on a tool to deploy some of the labels and things like that from a spreadsheet. If you've been on our other webinars, you've seen we do that with taxonomy, we do that with project portals. Everything we do, we automate. We have programmers that know Office 365 well, and then we automate it because we don't like to do things by hand. That might help. And still, we don't think, and we're a Microsoft shop, we don't think that the records management features will effectively do comprehensive records management for you now. Will that change? It looks like Microsoft's working in that direction. Well, a number of the things that Jim showed today are new, and they continue to change. But today, that's probably not a reality. Our next webinar is with Gimel, as I've mentioned. Gimel allows you to manage documents or records in multiple repositories. So, not only Office 365, but file shares and OneDrive and Box and Dropbox and OpenText and FileNet and so on. So that's how we do records management now. We use the platform, as I spelled out, for all of those great things that it does so well. The security and integration and workflow and all of those things. So we use it as a repository because it allows us to leverage all of the amazing things in the platform. But to get to true records management, we use an add-on. And we'll go through Gimel next week. They're going to have a lot of the airtime. They're going to show you how it works. And I think you'll find that it's a lot easier to understand than what Jim showed. And not Jim's fault. It's just that's feels like it's not completely cooked yet. So that's our strategy. We bring in third-party products. We use Knowledge Lake if there's a capture imaging component. Harmony will be our fourth webinar in the series. We'll talk about email management. So we'll show these add-on tools. We have found that the net cost of those tools is lower than some of the other all-up solutions, and we think they're more modern and more effective, and that's arguable, but we'll hope that we can prove that to you on the next couple of webinars. Next slide, Jim, and then we'll close out. There's some resources here. There's, again, we would love for you to join the next webinar so you kind of get the rest of the story. I don't want you to be left with, Office 365 doesn't do records management. We're not going to use it. That's not the end of the story. The rest of the story will be told on the next webinar on May 13th, and then we'll talk about managing email records on the 17th of June. There's some links here for some of the stuff that Jim showed. Jim, let's move to the next slide. We're not going to do this poll. We'd love to know what you're up to and what your problems are, but we don't have time. And that's kind of it. Last webinar, the first EDRMS one rather, we covered how to develop an effective RIM program, modern retention schedule, and taxonomy. Today, we talked about, can you use Office 365? What would you use it for? So we think it's a very effective platform and a records repository, but not necessarily effective at records management overall. We looked at what Gartner has to say. We compared it to the DoD. That's an ongoing conversation where we have a spreadsheet we'll continue to work on. We hope to share that with you around the time we do the Gimel webinar. So we've got a lot of work to do there. And then Jim showed demos of a number of the features. And next time we'll be talking about the full featured records management solution. And I think that's it. We have a lot of questions. And if you're able to stick around, I'm going to pick through some of them and I'll feed some to Jim. First question is, will the attendees of the webinar be receiving presentation or link? The answer is we will always do that. It takes us a few days. We put the answers to the questions, the technical questions, at the front of the presentation PDF, and that just takes time, and there's a lot of follow-up after these webinars, people reaching out to us and stuff. So we apologize. It might be Monday before that happens, and maybe I'll be doing it on the weekend, I don't know. But yes, you will get a link to the presentation and the recording. Some people have had technical difficulties on these webinars. I can't do much about that. I don't know if it's, my connection. I'm in Los Angeles, Jim is in San Jose. Let's go to webinar. We had almost 600 people signed up for this. So, and I think at peak we were at 400 and something people. So I just don't know. I don't know if that's related to the coronavirus issue and people working in different places, but we do our best. Hopefully the recordings came out well, and we apologize if they didn't. Another question about, will we get the deck? Someone asked, would like to see it mention clarification on alignment compliance with NARA, and I can't see the rest of it. I'm not an expert at, yeah, I don't know. Oh, there it is. Okay, I got it. NARA Universal ECM or ERM criteria. So that's something we'll have to research. I don't think Jim or I can do that one on the fly. More issues with the audio. We have 3 or more of these need enable multiple choice. Don't know what that means. Oh, this is for you, Brian. The survey that said multiple choice only allowed 1. Oops. Anyway, sorry to call you out like that. What is uptime and downtime? So uptime, if you're still on, uptime is the percentage time over a period, sometimes reported weekly or monthly or annually, we were looking at annual numbers that the system is up and available. So it's another way to say it is availability. And downtime is either scheduled or unscheduled downtime. So sometimes there's a maintenance window. In case of Office 365, the goal is to keep it up 100% of the time, and they've been really close. It's incredibly hard to get to, I think it was 99.79. That is an unbelievable number. And as I mentioned, it was a couple of hours of downtime an entire year. So that is extraordinary. You know, if you think about your own systems, you almost always have maintenance windows that, you know, you might have a 2 or 4 or even 8-hour maintenance window per month, and that would put you at a very low uptime percentage or a high downtime as compared to what Microsoft's achieving. More questions about recording. We said we were going to do that. Not hearing. What tools does Office 365 have to manage external content such as Slack? Do you have an answer for that, Jim?
I don't. I don't use Slack. I haven't run into any customers that are using Slack. I don't even know if you know. If I will say that if Slack has a layer for retention and disposition and all that kind of stuff built into their tool, and if that tool has a programmable interface, an API, then maybe you could use Power Automate with a connector to Slack to do some of that stuff. I don't really know. I'd really have to have a requirement in order to find the time to research that.
Yeah, there might be an integration point or something, but yeah, that's something we'll have to research. I'm going to read a long one, and I don't know if there's an answer to it, but I just love that somebody put in this question. Love this overview and can see a significant amount of our agency putting as much information into the Microsoft ecosystem as is feasible. Problem is we have numerous business unit specific applications, SAP, health apps, project management apps, that will never migrate their information to SharePoint or OneDrive. That's very normal, by the way. Almost all. We're not saying, by the way, we're not saying that if you're using a business solution that's for a particular purpose, you know, accounting or ERP or whatever, that, oh no, you know, you should use Office 365 for all the reasons I said. We would never say that. We are saying that you can integrate with them using some of the technologies that we talked about, like business connectivity services. We have had customers put their documents from those systems into Office 365, whether they're making copies or actually exporting them in a way, for lack of a better way, or where we're pulling in metadata for the purposes of you know, adding it to records in Office 365, and all of the above. Like, so sometimes, you know, bi-directional calling functions in another application and things like that. It all depends on what's supported from an API or web interface by those applications. And a lot of them now, those business applications support REST APIs and things like that, which are pretty easy to implement. Our typical integration, and, you know, don't hold me to this, but our typical estimate for an integration to an external system is 40 hours. And sometimes we do it faster. And that's, you know, that's not to pull in everything. We've done SAP before, and it can be a monster, but with a limited data set, we can effectively do an integration in less than a week. So very normal case. The person asking the question goes on to say that they need a vendor agnostic umbrella application or records management service that is over the Microsoft repositories. I think we're going to hit on that in the next webinar. I think you're going to see that Gimel is that to some degree. Love to talk to this person. We'll reach out and see if there's anything we can add to what I said today, or if that was even heard. Jim, this is for you. I want to double check. Can you set the retention time period in Office 365? Like if a certain file can be erased, not deleted after 7 years, while another can be, and I can't see the rest of the question. I'm struggling with this UI, but did you get enough of that? Can you set the retention time period in Office 365 to have a file be erased, not deleted after 7 years? I'm not sure what that means. Are you on mute?
Yeah, I'm not sure of the distinction. Maybe it's, you know, when it's disposed of by a retention policy, it is erased. It doesn't go to the recycle bin. So if that's what the question was about, I think I answered. If the question was about something else, I'd have to know the difference between erased and deleted.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I got it right.
Yeah. Well, since I'm the only one, the other person who can talk, I'm gonna say you did. I'm just kidding. All right. Which all tools will be complementary with Office 365? Can audit tools be used together? I'm gonna have to come back to that. I'm sure there's a good question in there. I just can't I can't figure it out right now. Would like to see where Gimel is on comparative app service with Gartner. Oh, in other words, is there a Gartner rating for Gimel? Okay, that's a really good question. Gimel will bring some information with them on the next webinar about, that kind of thing. I don't know if they're on Gartner's watch. I don't know if Gartner has a quadrant for that, but yeah, that's a good question. Somebody said we use IBM Lotus Notes for our email, and you know what? I'm going to have to learn how to use this interface. I can't get to the rest of these questions very well. So I don't know what that's about. I think we're probably I'll pick one or two more. Jim, why is retention under classification labels seems more appropriate to be under records management labels?
It's actually in both places. So from a records management standpoint, the retention labels show up as a row in the file plan. From a classification standpoint, and again, you might be in a different role. You could have one user that creates the labels and a different person, the records manager, that actually adds the file plan information to those. But the word classification in this context is about classifying the content against the retention schedule, or classifying the content based on its data sensitivity. How confidential should the data be? So that's, classification is just a way to say that we have a list somewhere and we want to match this content to an item in that list. For the records manager, the retention labels show up in the file plan where they can add additional information to those labels about, like we saw, about the department that it applies to, a category ID if we want to add that, and which regulatory requirements we're noting as the citation and authority for that decision. Perfect. So they show up in both places. That's one of the confusing things. What's the difference between a retention label and a row in the file plan? Not much, just where you go to look at it. You're looking at the same underlying data, just in a different way in a different tool. Again, probably based on your role.
Great. We've a question. Since we are a government agency, our data needs to be on Canadian servers. How would you handle migrating to cloud-based services if this is a requirement? We have several Canadian customers, some of which are government, and this probably happened in the last year and a half, maybe, that we can specify a Canadian data center. So I believe that is not an issue unless you have a different answer, Jim.
Yeah, there might be some apps like Planner that store their data in a very specific subset of Microsoft data centers. There might not be one of those in Canada, so that might preclude you from using Planner if it's a hard, fast requirement that all your data is within Canada. I can't say for sure. We'd have to research it every week, really. It depends on when you ask the question what the answer is going to be. Yeah.
You mentioned Gimel as a Microsoft partner. What do they provide that Office 365 doesn't? Now, that's going to be the subject of the next webinar. So we'll get that answered in the follow-up. How many file plan descriptors can you have? Do you know that one?
I haven't run into a limit, but of course I've only been working in demo environments. It's probably documented somewhere. When I am in the records management file plan, one great thing about this is, even though it's confusing and it changes relatively often when you consider about it, Microsoft's really good about keeping their documentation up to date and giving you good links to it to find more. So when I'm down here working with the labels, I might just click on any help links that I see, and I imagine somewhere in the documentation, there's if there is a limit to how many file plan rows you can have, it's probably quite high, knowing Microsoft, like on the order of thousands, if not tens of thousands. I would say if your file plan has more than 120 categories, it might be time to revisit your big bucketing approach, if you will.
I'm going to ask maybe a couple more. We're 15 minutes after. What did the blue and orange dots refer to in front of the labels?
Active versus inactive.
Oh, that's very impressive.
I didn't know. It's a great question. I didn't know, but I just hovered over it.
Oh, okay.
You can
Okay, so when you hover over it, it tells you. Okay, awesome.
Yeah. So you could build your whole file plan and just not activate any of the labels until you're actually ready to roll it out, until it's been fully approved. Great question.
Yeah.
We still got 167 people. 168.
They may have gone to lunch, but let's just say that they're all listening intently to everything we're saying.
Yeah.
Let's see. There was one more I wanted to ask. For the demo, which features are part of E3 versus E5? That's a great question.
Oh my gosh. That is such a good question that I'm not even going to try to answer.
Defer that. Okay, we got a lot of work to do between now and the time we send the follow-up out. But there are so many questions. It must have been good, or we left holes. I'm not sure.
So I can guess. The best I can do is guess based on my experience. This stuff, classification, sensitivity labels and retention labels, and automatically applying them to content and all that kind of stuff. E3, records management with the file plan, where you're doing event-based stuff and disposition approvals and a file plan with all these extra columns here. I imagine that would be E5. But again, I'm just guessing based on I've seen other things approached. Yeah.
I have a clarification to that one, and then we'll wrap. Does the E5 require just for, say, the records manager or the IT administrator, or is that for everyone?
I believe it's anyone applying labels to their content, or anyone with the ability to apply labels to their content. And as we saw earlier, users can change the labels that you as the records manager automatically apply to their content. So I imagine it's everyone, but again, that's just a guess. You'd have to talk to Microsoft directly, probably, to determine what your overall license needs are.
Right. Okay, well, we're going to wrap. Thank you for those of you who stayed on and are still listening. We appreciate it. We are going to endeavor to get all these questions answered and get the follow-up email out. We might separate it this time just so we can get the recording and presentation to you and then follow up with the questions because there are so many. But thank you. Be well, be safe. Come to the next webinar where we're going to kind of put it all together, and you'll see how we deal with some of the gaps in the records management features with GIML. Thank you and have a great day. Bye.